What's up, everybody? It is Christmas weekend, so what better movie to talk about than Roger Rabbit? Today we're talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit on the Story Geeks podcast, digging real deep into the story, trying to understand it a little bit better. And we're going to start the show off just off the top with a direct question. What is your overall take? This is a sort of a Marvel, a very unique version of a movie. OG, what is your overall take on Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Okay, so here's the deal, Jay. Like for me, I am just to give like a little background, little context. I'm not typically into this kind of meta humor, right? I'm not a huge Shrek fan and things like that. I think Roger Rabbit, though, the way they handle meta, absolutely brilliant. And it feels timeless. And I think it feels timeless because they were smart enough to sort of go back in time, right? So it's centered far enough behind, like in the 1930s, where it feels like it's not too dated. It's so far past, right? So I love that element of it. And I think that the concept of like this idea of like humans and toons sort of coexisting, this detective Eddie Valiant trying to figure out this murder, it just works, man. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I love this movie, and it says a lot. I'm telling you, I am not a meta guy. I typically don't like these kind of movies. This movie has a huge impact on me. This is an absolute classic. Honestly, a masterpiece in cinema, and I can't wait to dive into it. I'm in love with Roger Rabbit. What can I say?
OG says masterpiece. Josh Taylor from Modern Mouse. What is your take?
I typically like these kind of movies, but I will preface that in saying there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, right? When the Easter eggs become the plot points, I think that's wrong. But when they just exist in the narrative, I think that it works. And for here, there's so many layers, right? Like Story Geeks love digging deeper. This is something that you could watch at face value and have a really good time at it. You can keep going deeper and deeper and have an even greater time if you want to go that far, right? It meets people at the level that they're at. And it's also just a really fun time. And it truly is probably one of my favorite like top 10 films of all time. Every time I revisit it, I have a great time with it.
So OG is saying masterpiece. Josh Taylor is saying one of the top 10 films in the history of cinema. George the Italiano. What do you think?
So for me, this was a one-of-a-kind film for me, and I still feel like up to this date, nothing has been able to touch it as far as it being like a top-tier caliber film of all time. I remember seeing it when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I just felt like such a grown-up at that time because it's really not too much of a kid's movie. There's a lot of adult innuendos in there and everything, but you can kind of get away with it because it utilizes characters that we grew up with in a very kind of a provocative sort of way, but yet I don't know. Robert Zemeckis just made it work. And I love the time era of it. It was like the 1940s Hollywood kind of LA noir type of like mystery investigation. You had the music playing in the background, and you have these tunes where, as OG said, they kind of coexist with the humans, but yet their job is basically filming cartoons. So it's basically the cartoons are basically a live action for a tune. So I honestly, I absolutely love the movie. I still watch it up to this day, and I feel like it's a timeless classic that I think would never age in a bad way.
That's awesome. I'm going to give my opinion in just 1 second. But first up, OG, let's hit the intro. Thanks for joining us here on the Story Geek Show. It is a pleasure to be with you all. It hasn't been a Story Geek Show in a while. And the last time we had one, we did one about my movie. The one before that was hosted by OG. It was a fantastic conversation that I had to miss because of other commitments. But you guys did a fantastic job. Today with me to talk about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we all like it. I'm going to give you my opinion in 1 minute, is Orange Grove 55, the Grand Admiral of the Orange Grove 55 YouTube channel. Welcome to the show, OG.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. I love talking shop with you. I love deep diving into these films, and Roger Rabbit is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and we just heard Josh Taylor say it's in his top 10. Josh Taylor from Modern Mouse Radio, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. I love being able to talk about animation like I always do with Modern Mouse. So this is right in my wheelhouse.
Josh Taylor is a channel that digs deeper essay format into lots of animation, lots of Disney stuff, and even branching outside of that as well. He's a big Muppets guy too, by the way. So definitely go check out his content. And then George the Italiano, the host of Citrus Corner, is also with us and also said it was a masterpiece. George, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be back on Story Geeks. It's been a while to dive deep into these classic films, and I thought, what a better film to talk about than Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I mean, who doesn't love that lovable bunny? I mean, come on.
That's awesome. Well, my opinion on Roger Rabbit, I am Jay Sherer, a host of the Story Geeks podcast. And my opinion on Roger Rabbit is that I do really like it as well. I don't think it makes it into my top 10. I do.
Boo.
I wouldn't use the word. Yeah, I'm used to getting booed by Josh on all the shows that we do. I just like didn't faze me. I just kept going. The word I would use to describe Roger Rabbit is that it is a technical marvel. I don't think we're going to get more deeper into this as we go through the different questions I have prepared for us today. But one thing I want to just say on the offset is that to combine this world of live action and cartoons and do it in such a seamless way feels insanely difficult to me. This film may have the best that I have ever seen eye lines of the actors to things that are not there. It is crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah, absolutely, Jay. Like I was blown away as a kid watching this movie, but it was like it takes that Mary Poppins, Peach Dragon thing, and just brings it to like the next level.
Yeah, and
even today's standards, like when you watch a movie like The Rescue Rangers, on Disney Plus, the one that came out a couple of years ago. It still falls short compared to this movie from '89.
I'm telling you, whether it's one of the characters hitting a wall and the things on the wall shaking, whether it is, remember, nothing hit that wall. They had to actually shake it from behind, right? Like this is an insane level of planning in order to shoot a scene. When the baby slaps the lady's ass, like she reacts to it as if it happened. I mean, it's seamless. It's seamless. So the whole thing is a technical marvel. I think that there are elements of the story that I want to get deeper into that work better for me and work not as well for me. But from a technical standpoint, I just think it's unbelievable. Like it is a directing tour de force and an effects tour de force.
And it looks very breathtaking to the eye when you actually watch this film. But if you were to actually watch like the behind the scenes of how they were doing it, you'd look at it because technically it really doesn't look that good because you're seeing these people shake these objects, they're moving these shoes around and they're pushing boxes and you're looking at it like, how in the world is this going to look on the screen? This is a mess. But when you put it all together in the production value and the editing, and you put everything together, and then you have what is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It is quite astonishing of what they accomplished.
Astonishing is a fantastic word. So the first question I have for you guys, we all think that this film is fantastic and it's mind blowing in many ways. Unlike a lot of other films too. I mean, like there has been a combination of 2D animation and real live action before, but it just still feels different. And one of the reasons it feels different is because it literally takes a concept that to me feels impossible for the modern day and says that a group of competing studios will allow all of their IP to be used or a large chunk of their IP to be used. Competitors who have gone head to head for generations will allow this movie to get made by Touchstone at the time, although they give lots of credit to, I believe it's Amblin as well. Could this movie, Josh Taylor, be made in the modern day? What would it take for this movie to get made in the modern day?
Currently, I think like the only way that it would work is if all of these media conglomerates became one media conglomerate, Unfortunately, it's interesting for anybody who's not been to Hollywood, and if you've ever been on like a backlot tour, it's interesting because all these places seemingly do kind of work together in the background. You know, you have Disney renting out space on the Universal lot to film stuff, or Warner Brothers going to Paramount to use space over there or whatever. But as far as like making money, it's it's a difficult thing to even say. And I remember quite a few years ago, I had conversations about this. And I actually, for a while, I was going to like make a podcast seemingly about like who owns Roger Rabbit, could they ever do it again, etc.
Sorry, Josh, you just named the sequel right there. Who owns Roger Rabbit?
Right. But yeah, talking, I got the chance to talk to interestingly, like one of the first like big interviews I ever got to do was with Gary Wolf, who wrote the book, that the film's based on. And he was like, even I, as the author of the book, cannot continually make things with the imagery that was brought on screen. He has to create his own imagery, his own version of Roger if he's ever to do it. So there's so many contractual things involved with it.
That's so crazy because I didn't even know it was based on a book. This is me learning that for the first time.
Yeah, it's called Who Censored Roger Rabbit? And actually the book is about a comic strip cartoon, not an animated cartoon.
No way. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting though, Jay, like in this new day and age, I think a lot of these studios are kind of missing the boat here on the money that could be made because now we live in the world of streaming, right? Yeah. So imagine if they were to make a Roger Rabbit-esque film, right? Where you have Disney's IP in there, you could throw in Illumination, you could throw in Warner Brothers IP, and you could do a multi-drop release on the streaming services. Once they hit the streaming services, you can have this one movie that all these studios worked on drop on all the streamers.
Now, I will say that has happened. The Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie does have that. But I think the reasoning for it is because it's dropped on streaming where the money isn't necessarily for that one item, right? It's for the larger package. Chippendale's Rescue Rangers could have never been a theatrical release for that same reason.
But so Chippendale's Rescue Rangers only has Disney characters, right?
No, it has
really?
Sonic the Hedgehog in there, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
They even have South Park characters in it.
Yeah.
Do they really? I've seen it. I just don't remember.
So, but to OG's credit, it is so meta, and like it's that kind of meta that like Easter eggs and stuff make part of the plot points, and like it's difficult to follow. It's kind of forgettable in that way. Definitely not. It's the lesser of the two.
Yeah. That's interesting because Free Guy is another one, right? Where they use some characters from, but it was mostly Disney IP with that one too, wasn't it? Like it was like they had Captain America's voice or whatever show up in Free Guy at one point in time. But it's so fascinating to me because to OG's point as well, there seems to be this there seems to be somewhat of a myopic vision for what money making in film could be. It's almost like the competition overrides. There's almost like this sense that like, well, someone has to win. We can't all win. Like somebody's got to win, right? Like, and I wonder if that will break down over the next 10 years as the industry continues to probably see some really pretty significant struggles. The decline of linear is like more apparent than ever. I was just listening to The Town with Matt Bellany and Lucas Shaw, and they were like literally just talking about how every day that passes, the value of Paramount goes down. So it's kind of like, they were kind of saying like the guy, I can't remember, it wasn't Lucas Shaw. Sorry. It was another guest. I forget the gentleman's name, but Matt Bellany was asking this guy, and the guy was like, it goes down every year. Like the value goes for some of these properties just continues to go down. So when do you take them over? Because if you're like, I'm just going to wait it out until this is lower value, I pay less for it, why wouldn't I do that? Right? Like we're at a very weird period in time where the whole economics of filmmaking and of entertainment in general, the economic framework for that is far less viable than it used to be. And that's a very dangerous place. George, tell us, what do you think? Like, could this be done? If it was going to be done, what would have to happen before it actually gets done?
Well, I I think it's kind of funny in that sense because we constantly see in news and articles and everything where we constantly kind of even see these entertainment studio giants even doing deals now where it's like now there's in talks with Warner Brothers and Paramount, and then maybe Universal Comcast getting in on the deal. So it's almost like I feel like a lot of us people looking in through the window, so to speak, we don't really know what's going on beyond that window within these studios themselves. So we could be thinking that, you know, it may or may not happen. It could be a little bit more difficult for this to happen prior, you know, how it happened back in 1988. But it may not be as difficult as we may perceive it as, because we constantly see it as, oh my gosh, this company, you know, is going for this company and this. They may all go out to lunch every day and sit down and say, don't these people think that, you know, we have other things on our mind, you know, in that sense?
Well, and George, you bring up a great point. And Josh actually brought this up too, where there's a lot of collaboration between these studios. Disney actually films a lot. Josh brought this up. Disney actually films a lot on a lot of content on the Universal lot, right?
Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates of the Caribbean was filmed at Universal Hollywood.
Most of the animosity is, I think, between the fandoms and not the studios.
Exactly.
But imagine if Disney were to team up with, say, Universal. Let's say they made a Roger Rabbit-esque movie where you had Disney IP and you had Illumination IP. That's a property that's a film now that you can cross promote in the Universal parks and the Disney parks. I think there's money to be made there. Absolutely, you know. And you have that collaboration. That there's something there, I think.
But to the same token, on the other side is when they were in the midst of making this movie, you know, there was a lot of dotting I's and crossing T's, you know, to get these characters on screen together. Because I mean, there was some friction, like in the example with Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny. They both had to have the same exact screen time. And when I say the same exact screen time, literally, you couldn't show Mickey Mouse without showing Bugs Bunny, and you couldn't show Bugs Bunny without Mickey Mouse. If they were going to be in the same scene, they had to share the same equal amount of time. And I also think that was also the same notion with Donald and Daffy with the piano battle, which I thought was quite interesting. But I feel like sometimes we can insinuate of like how badly like those conversations are internally in these companies, where we could say, oh, I bet you know, oh, if Bugs doesn't, you know, have the same amount of time as Mickey Mouse, we're pulling Bugs out, or vice versa. It may or may not have been that way. We would never know because we weren't part of that conversation. But I feel like that sometimes us as fans, we jump too quickly to say, you know what, these companies aren't willing to will and deal. I think honestly, if there was enough of this, I think that they could make it happen.
Yeah, I just like how you said, hey, you know, we don't get what we like, we're going to pull our guy out, Bugs Bunny. Yeah, that's funny. we're going to pull our star player out. Sorry, guys, we got to.
I mean, it's true. It's true. I mean, one of the things that, you know, people talk about, and it's kind of gone back and forth, but like with the streaming wars, if we want to call it a war, it's like kind of become like, I don't know, just a weird thing where everybody gave up on it. But like IP has become such a you know, a word that people, intellectual property is like a phrase that people use that was not being used when, you know, Roger Rabbit was getting made. And you know, the DC stuff belongs on Max. The Marvel stuff belongs on Disney Plus. And those shall not cross paths. But we have seen a little bit of that here and there, where, you know, the Harry Potter stuff was on Max, then it moved to like Peacock, and then it moved back to Max. And so it's like ownership of some of these IP properties has shifted periodically. And I think one of the things that a lesson maybe from Roger Rabbit here is that instead of David Zaslav just chucking something out the window, selling it to a different company, allowing other people to have some of these IPs. And we're starting to see that, like Tubi starting to gain some of the stuff. Obviously, they're, ad revenue centric rather than, subscription centric. But like some of those things can work. And so, I mean, they're obviously not things crossing on screen, but they certainly are IPs that are moving from studio to studio or streaming service to streaming service. So I wouldn't be surprised in the long run if we do see some of this. And maybe there is an answer there that's like, instead of buying out Paramount or selling off your movie that you don't think is going to make any money, maybe start saying like, hey, what if we got together with Marvel and did a big crossover movie, and like had Superman versus Captain America or whatever, like people would go crazy.
Dude.
So that to me, it's like there's a lesson here in Roger Rabbit that I think could be a potential, touchdown play for Hollywood if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And as I said to you fellas before we started recording, and I'm going to say it directly to all these studios right now: cut your bullshit.
Right, exactly. No, but I mean, imagine that though, right? Marvel, the MCU in its heyday, like 3 or 4 years ago, having a crossover movie with DC. I mean, that would be insane. Like,
but even now, within 2 minutes, I could sell you on Batman versus Iron Man. Like the pitch is easy.
Yeah. Right. And then when that thing hits the streamer, the two studios, WB and Disney, can cross promote that. Now you have that streamer release on Max and Disney Plus same day. You promote both streamers get the boost. It helps both companies
and that
out.
could actually also help the park industry as well, because if they kind of sort of how they did with Harry Potter, but do it where it's two separate parks with two separate companies. So in order to kind of get a little taste of like the movies into the parks, you could see the Marvel side, but in order to see the DC side, then you have to go over, eventually if, WB becomes part of Universal or what have you, or vice versa. So then it could actually help that industry. So sometimes you think these studios feel like they sometimes have like a little bit of a greed to say, okay, we could one up this studio over the other. But sometimes if they just kind of, not all the time, but just kind of work together in harmony a little bit, sometimes it could benefit them in the long run.
Well, it's like YouTube, right? Like if you're a content creator on YouTube and you collaborate with another YouTuber, you both benefit from that, because there's like you guys share, you're going to bring over each other's audiences to your, like, so if I'm on, Fresh Baked, some of Fresh Baked audience would come over to me and some of my audience would go to Fresh Baked. There's that cross pollination, I guess you would call it, so it works, So I think a lot of studios they're missing the boat on this. I know there's a lot of legalese involved with it, and that's probably why it's kind of being held up. But man, I think if they can get through all that, I think it'd be worth it.
But they did it in 1988. Why can they? Why can they not do it now?
I would say that. So I'm gonna just for the sake of saying what another theory could be, and this is actually building off of what Josh said, I think a little bit. If you look at the profitability problem, or the revenue, let's call it revenue. We won't even call it profitability. If you look at the revenue problem that Hollywood faces, you had a very clear revenue chain, we'll call it. You had box office revenue, and after the box office revenue, you had sales revenue plus DVD rental revenue at the same time. You had both those going on. Then you could sell those properties to TV. Right. So you could sell like, okay, well, now the movie's going to go on TV and we're going to have a bidding war for however much they're going to pay on TV. Right. Then Disney went a step further and said, oh, by the way, we're also going to have a vault, and only sometimes we are going to release things that release movies that you could buy again. So there was this very clear, like at least 3 places where you could earn revenue, or you could choose to do a low budget and just go direct to DVD, which was kind of a thing too, right? Direct to VHS was even more popular. Now we don't have that middle section because physical media is, I mean, Best Buy is getting out of the business of physical media. So the only time you see that happen is when demand is crazy low. So people go like, oh, well, I'll just own it on Amazon or whatever. I don't need to own a hard copy of it. But the point that Josh made, I think, is really interesting because the streaming wars do feel like there were people vying for basically the position that Netflix holds. And this is really fascinating to me because you could easily actually reverse the market and make it more profitable for the studios if Netflix became the TV model in the box office DVD TV, right? Because now as a studio, I can say I get the box office revenue, then I get my streaming revenue because it's on my streaming service for about a year, and then I start selling it over to Netflix, who's basically the TV station, and everyone who watches on Netflix, you don't see it for a while, then you get to see it because it's like 4 years later, like it used to be on TV, right? You wouldn't see the things for like 2-3 years. I feel like the streaming wars, everybody's said like, I don't want to actually fit into this in a way that's really profitable. I'd rather be the one that wins, as opposed to the stratification of the marketplace so that the most amount of people can make money. And I think it's actually complicated even more because as that entertainment marketplace, and I would say the tech marketplace, has gone through this significant kind of disruption where everything is kind of out of whack and no revenue streams seem to be reliable. I mean, Netflix is the only one that seems super reliable. Then you get the competition that goes crazy haywire, where you get like, Elon Musk calling out Iger at a place and basically telling him to F himself or whatever, right? Like, this is where it's like, okay, instead of working together in this nirvana state of Roger Rabbit, now we're just trying to fight for what's left because we all want to be the top dog, as opposed to saying, if you were the second dog, we would actually make more money together. And that just seems like a big miss in my view of how this is going. Like, for example, there's a Peacock, there's a Paramount, the number of streaming services is kind of ludicrous. Like, why do you all need your own? You know what I mean? Like,
basically what it boils down to it, since we're in the holiday season, when they say peace on earth, goodwill towards men, is Roger Rabbit actually the answer to all of that?
Right, exactly.
Like, you look at, to your credit, Jay, you look at, was it Fubo TV or like Roku, what, like all this, they started as television, right? They're advertiser first, content second. And they're starting to get some of the stuff that's trickling down. And they're winning because, and to Peacock or Disney, Universal, Disney, Paramount, whomever, like they're starting to give some of their stuff to those ad revenue streaming services. And in a way, that's how it's replaced television. Let's just move to that model. Like, it makes sense financially for everybody involved. It makes sense for the consumer because, like, now you've got people who, hey, I don't want to spend $15 a month for, MGM Plus because what the heck does it have for me? But then you get to see what's on MGM Plus because you go to Roku channel or whatever, and then you watch that and you go like, oh, actually some of the stuff on here I like, maybe I will get MGM Plus. It's meeting people where they are for the consumer standpoint, but it's also allowing people to see some of the goods that you have going on rather than paywalling everything.
Yeah, and I think the main problem, because what you described is really fascinating to me, because it was what Netflix used to be. Like, let's not forget, Netflix used to be a competitor to Blockbuster, right? Where you would get mail-in videos from something the studios had already produced. And then Netflix said to themselves, they said, you know what? We can increase operational efficiency if we have a streaming service and we're not doing this mail stuff all the time. But then Netflix did something incredibly sneaky. They said, what if we also became a studio? And then they all of a sudden took over that entire space. And then instead of all the studios going, whoa, what does this mean for us? And where do we fit into this kind of category? They all said, we need to be Netflix. And that has taken us down a road that has been Rocky, and that only Netflix is winning. To be honest,
every studio is now finding out. Oh, Netflix was losing money on this.
Yes.
Oh, now we're losing money on this.
Yes.
The only way that Netflix was gaining money was by having the rights to other people's movies.
Yeah, and now it's incentivizing. The Netflix model is incentivizing. I don't want to say lower quality because I think that's unfair to the works, but it's definitely inspiring mid-range kind of budgets, right? You're not seeing like Netflix spend $295 million on an Indiana Jones movie. They're like, no, we'll do an $80 million, $100 million Chris Hemsworth movie. That, they do have some Oscar contenders, but those are not intended to be Oscar contenders at all. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is Netflix doing that? Because Netflix is a tech company, and the whole model of like, you produce something amazing, so I must go see it, is no longer the actual thing motivating you to do things. Now what's motivating you to do things is, I want people to spend time on my service. Right. Because the more time you spend on my service, either the more I make in ad revenue, or the more I can say that we got views from people, or whatever it is. And that's a whole different kind of metric. So now you just have train wrecks constantly. If you have train wrecks, like reality shows, maybe, then you keep people on platform, and it's just a completely different model.
It's quantity over quality, basically.
Yeah.
Just Netflix. That I can be on Netflix. Literally, I can be on Netflix, and I can search through 300 movies, and I can't find a damn thing to watch. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what it is. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but is there anything worth watching now? It's quantity over quality.
Netflix has always been like an aggregator, which is why it makes sense for it to be the TV portion of the model, right? Like everyone comes here because all the things are here eventually. But they actually just flipped the script on everybody to such a degree that everybody else went, oh, I want to be Netflix. We even saw this from Disney. Even Disney said, we need more quantity. Just put as many things out there as possible, which is super counter to what they would have ever done prior to that, right?
Right.
It wasn't a numbers game prior to that. Anyways, we're off of the Roger Rabbit conversation.
This was a show about Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to get back to Roger Rabbit and ask another question that I think is a fascinating one, and we alluded to it earlier in our discussion. This came out in '88. I was still in elementary school at that time, and I was not allowed to watch it for like years because my parents were like, it's not for kids. The interesting thing about it is it's rated PG. Does it feel too adult, George? Does Roger Rabbit feel like it's too adult? Is it the right kind of adult? What age range are we talking about Roger Rabbit being acceptable for or intended for?
Okay, so I was actually, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, I had the opposite impact than you, Jay. You weren't allowed to watch it. I actually was allowed to watch it. I watched it at like 4 or 5 years old because at the time my parents weren't like connoisseurs of like the film business. Like all they saw was, oh, it's animated cartoon characters, he could watch it, and then you see a character sticking his hand on Jessica Rabbit's cleavage and then pulls out and is like, nice booby trap. It's like, okay.
So George, is this your origin story and how you ended up on the Bad Thoughts podcast?
Exactly.
Basically. But I feel like back in that time frame, you can kind of get away with a lot of that stuff where I feel like that as kids growing up, we had a little bit of how do I put this, thicker skin, so to speak, where I feel like today's kids, or even just the parental, it's like, oh my gosh, like one little thing that steps out of line, it's like, no, like what signifies is it being too kiddie or too adult? Where is that middle ground? I really honestly don't think there is such thing, because you have to have something of an imbalance to be able to create a good story, to have great characters. And yes, it does have a lot of, adult innuendos, but there's even a lot of animated films out there that just for the sake of saying, yeah, this is a kid's movie, but it's jokes or innuendos that's only made for the adults, and it just flies right over the kid's head, but the adults get it. But because us as adults understand it, then we label it and say, oh, this isn't for the kids, where the kids aren't even really going to even understand it anyway, unless you really sit down and have that conversation with them.
This is the one thing I actually loved about Michael Eisner, is that Michael Eisner saw animation not just for children. And that's what I love about him. The Japanese understand this. When you watch anime, a lot of stuff is not for kids.
Wild.
Now there is a lot of stuff for kids, but there's also a lot of stuff not for kids, right? And Michael Eisner dipped his toe into that world a little bit with Roger Rabbit. Yeah, it's not for kids. There's a lot of adult stuff in that movie, but I like that because animation is not like a genre. It's not a kid genre. Animation is a medium. It's just
that's what made that film so much to have realism into it, because to incorporate live action people intermixed with the animated characters, it's like, then that means you'd have to sugarcoat the live action characters. So you kind of have to bring the animated characters up to their point and vice versa.
Right. And Walt Disney understood this, right? Walt Disney never talked down to his audience. Like, Walt Disney is going to kill Bambi's mom in front of everybody. He doesn't care. But yeah, it's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? And back then that was a big deal, you know? And I think Michael Eisner, at least at that first 10 years of his tenure, he understood that, right? Roger Rabbit was a prime example. Even Lion King, you know, the way Mufasa died, pretty tragic, you know? And I feel like animation has lost a lot of that in recent time. It's become the kiddie pool again. You see a lot of Illumination stuff with the Minions and all that stuff. And even Disney, they're afraid to go a little adult. And it saddens me because animation is a beautiful medium and it shouldn't be just for kids. So is Roger Rabbit adult? Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I think animation can be for adults too.
It's not too adult, right? Like it's family, right? It's not too adult. It's not too childish. You brought up, I mean, the good point is Eisner, and I think the executives throughout the industry during that time understood that. And it's because they grew up in a time pre-television, right? Like when you went to the movies, no matter what, they would go see a rated R, or what would be deemed rated R, even though the R rating didn't exist then, a rated R type of gangster movie. And right before that, you'd see a Betty Boop cartoon. You know, like regardless of what the film was, there was always a cartoon before it. Television is the thing, the Saturday morning thing is the thing that moved animation into, hey, this is for kids. And nowadays, you have the kids' Netflix version that's just all, you know, kid stuff. And so they don't even highlight that stuff on regular Netflix. And so they've now separated the audiences even more. The family film or the family whatever rarely exists these days. The only person the only good family films that are really coming out are like the Paddington movies, which I will fight people for that bear. I love him. Or, you know, like it's the same director that did Wonka, which is a perfect family film. But like, yeah, that like Eisner understood, hey, these characters were from my childhood, yes, but they also still work in adulthood because Betty Boop is a little risque. So let's move that direction, right? The big bad wolf does lust after the sexy woman on stage. So let's go there. The Mask also brought that back in like the 90s too. Like it was that same kind of cartoon energy from the early days prior to television. But yeah, we've somehow over time decided cartoons are just for children. And so why would they not, you know, but they appeal. I think it's fun to see a cartoon. It's fun to whatever, even in comics, you go back and you look at like some of the classic Peanuts comics. It's like, oh, they were like deep philosophical comics. These were not for children.
Well, and it's like, I know I'm going off the beaten path here, but it's to your point, Josh, even scenes in Aladdin with the genie, you know, they had Robin Williams literally go off. There's like so much recording and footage of that they didn't even use. And you then take your child to watch this animated film and you see this genie character reenacting these actors of Rodney Dangerfield and Jack Nicholson. And it's like the adult can understand it to say, oh, he's portraying Groucho Marx or what have you, or the child isn't going to do it. They're just going to see it as this kind of like whimsical type of thing. So there was a point of time, unfortunately, it's not too much now, where there was like a middle ground where children and adults can enjoy an animated film together without the adults sitting saying, okay, I'm going to take my child to go see this because it's animated. And I think that's what too also hurts these animated films at the box office, is because it's not really for the majority. It's just for one particular audience.
Well, and that's what Walt Disney wanted to avoid. He wanted everyone to enjoy the movies and the parks. So like when I go, if I had kids, right, and I'm taking my kids to a Minions movie, I'm not getting anything out of that movie. You know what I'm saying? Like there's nothing there for me. It's all for my kids, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, but Disney understood for a long time, at least, that like, you know, if the adults find value in that, you're going to make more money. You know, Walt knew it from the get-go, and Pixar knew that too for the longest time. There were adults that really wanted to see these Toy Story movies and what have you. You know what I'm saying? So there's value there, but somewhere down the road.
Yeah. You know what Roger Rabbit does really well, which Looney Tunes also did really well. Animaniacs, basically Warner Brothers did really well. Right. And Disney did in its early days, but doesn't now, or didn't even at this like the 90s. Or late 80s, 90s, is that when you watch Roger Rabbit, subconsciously, you go like, oh, who's that character? I've never seen him before. Like, I got to figure out who that is, right? It makes you curious about stuff. And then you go back and you find it. Like, when you go and watch, like, old Looney Tunes, and they're making fun of Groucho Marx, right? Or they use him in a little skit, you're like, who is that? And it makes me, as the audience member, want to go find out, and I become smarter because of it. And it's made me more culturally rich. And I think that Roger Rabbit does do that. And I feel like animation has maybe steered away from that, or I mean, not maybe, it has steered away from that for the most part. And there's not those things for adults that go like, oh, Groucho Marx, I know that. Yeah, like, okay, got it. Like, even in the kids' movies, there used to be that. And it's a rarity these days.
Yeah. It's super rare.
I think that there's I think that all of what you guys have said is super true. One of the things I find really fascinating, and I kind of wonder where this is going to go overall, but we are in a marketplace where content. I'll say not. I don't want to say content. Entertainment creation has never been easier. Right? It's like the easiest it's been in the history of mankind. And because of that, you can create entertainment that is specific to very narrow niches of people who like certain things. And that has become very prominent with the rise of the internet and the rise of social media and the rise of technology. I think it's only going to get worse with the rise of AI, to be honest, because now I can create, if I want to create Roger Rabbit, but I want to be in the movie, I can just type into the AI, like, I want to see Roger Rabbit with me as the detective or something, right? And one of the things that's done is that was not true in the 80s. The 80s was still a decade where we had, yes, cable was out, but we had limited options largely, right? So you had to, if you were going to make a major studio release, it did have to be a 4-quadrant kind of thing, or it had to have its niche and say, we're going to hit this niche, but this niche is large enough because it's a thriller for adults, like a Fatal Attraction or something. And it's going to be something that gets enough people into theaters that we're going to watch it. And so you could have these like sort of age-defying characteristics, right? I don't know that we have that anymore. It's like we just make content for these people, we make content for those people, we make content for these people over here, and it's changing the nature of our entertainment in a lot of ways, I think. Because I think that Roger Rabbit's a really good example of they did not make it, in my opinion, for George when he went to see it. It was not made for 4-year-olds. It was like, no way. We're making this for like 10 and above, right? It's not PG-13 because you're not going to see anything so objectionable that you're going to be like, oh, this is just, I can't believe it. But it is going to have elements in it that, you know, George appreciates it because he had this pretty cool experience as a kid. But I'm assuming, George, you probably didn't understand most of it. You just thought cool cartoons with people.
Yeah, not most of it. But what was actually funny was when I saw my dad laughing at certain notions of the movie, I kind of like watched his reaction thinking, okay, why is he laughing but I'm not? So
It makes me
there's
curious.
something there that I'm missing. Because I was
Right.
very inquisitive as that child, and actually, I think I kind of owe it to Roger Rabbit, where that I got a lot of my sarcasm and a lot of my shtick, so to speak, because I would watch these things where it wouldn't just necessarily say what the joke is, but it was that undercover innuendo.
Right.
And when I would see my dad laughing, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I want to know what is it, and I'm asking like, why is that funny? And then he kind of had to explain it to me in to how a child would understand. I'm like, oh, okay, now I kind of get it. Where again, I think we don't give kids the enough credit of
Yeah.
what they can really absorb and understand. I
100%.
think as you say all the time, OG, Walt Disney did not want to downplay to kids when it came to his films. Not with anything. Not with his animation, not with his live action, not even with his true life adventure series. You see some of these documentaries where these animals are ripping other animals apart. He didn't care. It was like, this is nature. This is how it's supposed to be.
Right.
But it was
Well,
supposed to be for the overall for a family. You know, you sit down, you have that kind of conversation.
yeah, no, 100%. You didn't have that like that watering down of content back then, where it's like we got to make this like this kiddie kind of film for Walt Disney never did that, and even a lot of the Michael Eisner films didn't do that. Hunchback of Notre Dame is a dark movie. That's a
I would say
dark
that,
movie.
but you got to say the entertainment industry in general assumed whoever the audience was intelligent enough to meet this media wherever it's at, right? Look at video games. Nowadays, it's like, oh, the save point is every 5 minutes. But like when we all grew up collectively, right? Like in the original Nintendo era or whatever, it's like as soon as you turn the console off, turn it back on, you gotta start over. Like, bro, like you're screwed. So there's like this lack of hand holding that from every entertainment conglomerate. Same with television, right? If you're watching television, maybe they might have that previously on type of thing at the very beginning, but you're probably like just gonna jump into the deep end here, and you're gonna have to figure out who these characters are and what their story is. Nowadays, we have the luxury of, oh, I can just go on Netflix, start the show at the beginning. Sorry, and to that, I guess, like, maybe that's saying something culturally about who we are as people. Of like, we should probably
the TikTok
be
generation,
smarter. Right? Yeah, of like being like, oh, do I need everything explained to me? Do I need? We have the resources, right? We could Google anything.
Yeah. There's also a sense. I get there's a sense too of, if you think about some of the eras of, and Josh, you're like an eras guy, so you would know this. But if you think of some of the eras, like Walt Disney becomes insanely popular after World War II.
Yeah.
You have. I think that there are cultural moments where the world is in tension, and that we are shielded from a lot of that in the modern day. Meaning that, like, we don't feel it. We can see there's lots of information. I'm not suggesting that there's not lots of information. And there's even more brutal videos and things like that of the war between Russia and Ukraine. But what we're not doing is we're not going out there and experiencing it, or we're not seeing our family member being sent overseas to go fight in that war. So when we see Bambi, that's the most intense thing we've ever seen, right? It's not, I didn't send my kid out to go to battle. Like, I'm literally watching Bambi and being like, this is horrific. I want to shield and protect my kid from this. Whereas previous generations, I think, lived in an era where life was far more chaotic and you were not guaranteed. So seeing Bambi on screen, Bambi's mom die on screen, was not like, it was almost like you could experience that. Today, we like shield ourselves from that. We protect ourselves from that. We don't want to see those kinds of things. And I think that it's an interesting conversation, because I think there's two different conversations that we're actually having at the same time, and they're both related to one another. And that is, what do we mean by adult content? Yeah, because there are some things that you'd say Bambi is a kids movie intended for kids, but it has very adult themes, right? Oh, yeah. It's almost like Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers would hit you with some, are you feeling anxious today? Like, I mean, he would hit you with some intense stuff, but he did it in such a way that was like, well, this is for kids. nowadays I feel like we even have things that are for adults that are actually removing intensity. They're like dialing back intensity. It's like, wait a minute, but this is for adults. Why do we have to dial that back?
Well, and to your point, Jay, I've had this conversation with OG many times. I've said it on the show so many times, and this is going to sound kind of dark of me, but it's like, even when it comes to the villains, like when you watch films today of how the villain is defeated, it's very diluted. I love to see when you kind of put yourself to watch this film, that you are throwing everything into watching this, and you get to know these characters, and even to the villain that you love to hate, and you're like, wow, I really want to see this. Part of my French, I really want to see the son of a bitch being taken out. Like, and it's like, so like when you take a movie like Tarzan, and Clayton ends up wrapping himself in the vines, and then he strangles himself and hangs himself, and then you see the silhouette of him hanging there. It's like, it's supposed to be for a kid's movie. It's animated, but it had an adult moment of something that could happen in real life, but just in the form of animation. Nowadays, they say, okay, the character gets sucked into a mirror and he lives his days out. That was the one thing that kind of got to me about Wish, was I would have loved to have seen this character's demise be much more brutal than just getting sucked into this staff and in the mirror, and a little piece is shattered and they throw him into the dungeon, and then you kind of hear him say, I forget, Josh, he says something in the notion of it smells down there or something or other.
Yeah, it makes a little joke.
They throw a little joke. Like, to me, that just completely blew the whole notion of what made that character a villain in the first place.
I'm gonna swing this back to Roger Rabbit.
Yes, please do.
Yes.
Go for it.
So with Wish, one of the complaints I had, actually, I just went and saw it for a second time yesterday, and I liked it the second time better. But with Wish, one of the complaints I had, and one of the complaints that people have in general, right, is the mystery or switch of a character from hero to villain, or like the twist villain. One of the problems with Wish is that I don't feel like the second act, which is typically this is getting really dark, how is the hero going to get out of this, really ever happens. I feel like the hero's pretty safe most of the time, because the villain is not overtly evil. When you go back to Roger Rabbit, and it's this whodunit type of thing, you know that like Judge Doom is evil, but you do not know who killed Eddie Valiant's brother. Right? Until you get to, it gets so dark and you don't know how they're going to get out of it. And then you get to the point where he reveals, I killed your brother and I sounded like this. And Judge Doom is so frightening. And it's so like when you back out and you zoom out and you go like, it's just this actor with helium, like it's not really frightening, but the way that it's sold to us as the audience is he's such a killer. He'll kill anybody. And he's such a dark, twisted person that when they finally overcome Judge Doom, it's such a relief as an audience member. Right. And it's like, it has to get darker. And yes, is that safe for children? I mean, some people would say these days, probably not. But I think as a kid, I was willing to take that. Like George was like, oh yeah, I love this. Sure. Like we assume, like it goes back to what OG said, we assume kids are dumb, or like we don't think that they're smart enough to take in stuff. But like if we were to say like, hey, the world is brutal, this character is brutal, we're going to shove the hero that you're rooting for so far down, but by the end of it, the reward is going to be that much greater. That's what people loved about Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. By the end of Return of the Jedi, you're like, he overcame all of this. He had his hand cut off. Where's he going to come back?
His aunt and uncle were burned to a crisp, basically by his dad. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Right. And think about this, you guys. Think about this. Like, there's this culture right now. We talked about it, where like entertainment talks down to children. Right. We got to sanitize everything and make it real safe for kids, for them to enjoy it. You talk to any kid. You mentioned Star Wars. Who's your favorite Star Wars character? If you had to ask a little kid that, it's going to always be Darth Vader. This guy was a murderer, a straight up murderer, and every kid loves Darth Vader. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's what I'm saying. Like, it's okay to get.
Well, I think it's so ironic that you have these like overprotective parents that are like, "Oh, my child can't watch that. You know, God forbid, that's horrible. It'll warp their minds." And then here's their kid having earbuds listening to Eminem, and it's like,
but like,
it's like really.
We all were children. We should all realize that by the time we were 10 years old, we all knew the F word, right? Like,
right.
Why are we like? It's going to seep in. Why not just allow kids to just like learn about things and on the other side of it, trust the media companies? We've lost this idea of trust in our entertainment. So there's like there's like the mommy blog of like people go to that's just like, is this safe for my kid to watch? Like, did the dog die? It's like, yeah, it's Old Yeller. The dog dies. Like, but you know what? It's brutal. But once you show it to your kid, you go like, okay, do you still want a dog? Realizing that this dog will probably die before the end of your life.
Yeah.
Then that brutality at the very end, when your dog dies, 10 years down the line or whatever, isn't as harsh of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And,
or you can
and
live
also
in the bittersweet nature of it too, right?
Yeah.
Like in other words, like there's this idea that if you sanitize something, the idea would be that you experience less pain because it has been sanitized. Right. The problem is
right.
the world involves a lot of pain, right? Like the thing I like to say, it's not my original thought, but you open the paper and you never say, wow, the world is a great place. You never open the newspaper and say, the world is a great, safe place. I'm so glad that we're here. And I think that the problem is that the more you sanitize things, the more you make them... well, I'll say it this way. I'll say it to the reverse. And this is true of Roger Rabbit, and it's true of James Gunn. He makes devastating films that deal with very intense subject matter. The Guardians of the Galaxy, the first movie, starts with the kid's mom dying, with Peter Quill's mom dying. The second one is you're being betrayed because your father is one of the most horrific people that you've actually ever met, and you've wanted to see your father this whole time. Guess what? He's an asshole. And then the third one is like, what does someone who is ruthlessly trying to play God doing to this swath of animals that exists, right? Like these innocent animals that he's just completely tearing to shreds. And I think that like those kinds of things are what makes stories so powerful. So the sanitization of those things to me is like counterintuitive, because it's almost like I'd like to protect myself from this. But you're to your point, Josh, now you're saying to the studios, I don't trust you to introduce this to me, this the way the world actually is. Please tell me the world is different than it actually is. And that's what I would rather reflect on today. And I think that is I think that that's really negative. And maybe it's one of the main points of why we are struggling so much with quality entertainment today, right? Like, I mean, I think even if you look at Indiana Jones, this latest Indiana Jones, was there ever really any part of it where we really were scared of the way things were going to go? I mean, in the third Indiana Jones, he's scared to lose his dad, and there's not an ability to connect. The second one, he's literally going to be sacrificed to a different god that he doesn't even believe in, and the first one is heavily leaning into what it looks like for the Nazis to take Jewish artifacts and use them to their advantage. I mean, these are like pretty insane topics that are weaved into these stories. But then you get the latest one, and it's kind of like, well, it's a bummer that I'm old. Right? It's like, I mean, it's like, it's not going as deep as we could go with some of these things. And I know that the 80s kind of said, like, we're just throwing deep stuff at you and like, just kind of deal with it. And we're not necessarily going to come to any like major conclusions. It's not like the 80s were like the era of like church films or something that came to like wrapped it up in a bow. It just left you with like, yeah, this is crazy. This is the way the world is. It's nuts. And you just had to deal with it. I think that was better. I preferred that.
And that's why I have respect for Quentin Tarantino. I mean, he's like one hell of a filmmaker, and like his his stories are like, I mean, he basically wrote himself off to Hollywood of how, it's like, it's either you're going to take it or leave it, love it or shove it, so to speak. It's like, these are the stories that I want to tell, and I'm going to tell them the way that I want to portray them as, and it's like nothing off of, anything specific, you're not downing one over the other. It's just, I just want to tell a great film that's just very violent. It's like that was just him. But kind of going back to Roger Rabbit, of where I really appreciate the film is because, again, growing up with that, it allowed me to learn a lot of things that like a 4 or 5-year-old really wouldn't know unless you actually watch that film. For instance, actor Bob Hoskins, who played Eddie Valiant. I got introduced to him in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but then my dad introduced me to him as Smee in Steven Spielberg's Hook. So because I obviously, now that's another movie where you can kind of take a look at it and say, is that really more geared towards a children's movie? It's a little more adult. You have Rufio, who then gets killed by Hook. A child, an adult killing a child in that sense is horrific, but it's like, but anyway, so that's where he introduced to say, hey, here's a movie that Bob Hoskins is in. You loved him in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Here he is. And so it introduced another whole live action film for me. It introduced to me who Frank Sinatra was when Eddie Valiant pulled out the sword at the end and got on that conversation to say, oh, who's that singing? That's Frank Sinatra. Oh, well, who's Frank Sinatra? So then it dove into a whole nother complete
fly me to the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a few things I think that I would highlight specifically in Roger Rabbit to showcase literally what the subject matter is dealing with, right? One, it's played for comedy, but nobody denies that Jessica Rabbit cheats on Roger. Right, it's played for comedy. It's like, oh, it's a no big deal thing. It's a patty cake thing. But like literally, they all think, and even she thinks, like, it. Yeah, I did that, right?
Yeah.
So you have that concept. You have the concept of Eddie Valiant having lost his brother and now being an alcoholic, which is a central theme of the thing, and having become an alcoholic, now losing touch with the world around him. Right. So he can't even connect with. I can't remember her name. The bartender. You guys remember her name offhand?
I don't.
Give me a second. Wait, give me a second.
Okay.
Give me a second. As you Google it, George.
Yeah.
Just give me a second. Let me
give me a second.
Let me refresh my memory real quick. 1 sec.
Then you have the concept of the bad guy is literally turning his back on his own tunes, right? And he's brutal about it. I mean, when he takes the shoe and puts the shoe in the dip, which I was really glad that they did that at Disney when they did the Halloween stuff when they had him there.
Dolores.
Yes, Dolores.
Not that I looked it up or anything.
Yeah.
The other thing though that he's doing that's in the background of the entire film is very Chinatown. I mean, the film very much Robert Zemeckis is pulling from Chinatown the whole time.
Yeah.
Is that Judge Doom is also a politician who is helping the auto industry dismantle the public transportation industry.
Yep.
And so he's a villain on all levels.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, Josh. I love it. I absolutely love it.
And then you have Marvin Acme who gets murdered. You have R.K. Maroon that gets shot in the back. So I mean, it has everything that's wrapped up with a good crime investigation type of 1940s. But you just throw cartoons into the mix, and it's like, how would that situation play out with that? And
it's brilliant, and that's why I love it so much. The thing that really bothers me, and this kind of ties into the parks a little bit, right? Is that this whole idea, like back in 1988, the Jessica Rabbit thing, it was all good, right? Nowadays, it's not so all good. Now, they at Disneyland, at least, they put a trench coat on her in the ride. You can't show too much or whatever, right? It's like, I don't understand, when did it become problematic for a woman to be sexy? It's not like Jessica Rabbit was like this damsel in distress. Jessica Rabbit was a badass. She was a tough woman. You know what I'm saying? She could handle her own. You know what I'm saying? Just because she looked really good doesn't mean that she was lesser or like weaker or anything like that. I don't understand that whole thing. Back then they got it. It was fine. It was nowadays though, it's like, oh, we got to cover her up. If she's sexy, then she's weaker. It's like, what are you talking about? I don't know. And maybe I'll get canceled for that. I don't know. But for me, I don't get it.
That's an American thing, right? The Americans will tell you, oh yeah, like gun violence, whatever is totally fine. But like the moment that sex gets involved, you better close your eyes, kids, because like that's the craziest thing you could ever show a child.
Well, right. And it's also what it's doing. This is what's really fascinating to me, because my wife said something to me yesterday that I found really interesting. My wife's name happens to be Jessica, right? And so she said, when I saw that, what's that?
She's a rabbit.
Yeah, exactly. She said to me, she says, when I saw that film as a little girl and her name was Jessica, I felt like I had to live to that standard. Like that was like a thing that I was supposed to work toward. And what's interesting about that to me is that the removal of it by Disney is the acknowledgement that conversation is not happening in a healthy place in the family. And that's what's crazy about it. Because the thing is that like, I think that one of the things that's interesting about trying to nerf everything, right? Trying to make everything like take the difficult parts of life out of all the content that we see, is that it's actually saying that Disney is basically saying there's no other healthy way for people to learn about this, so we'll pretend that it doesn't exist. And that's the part that's crazy, because the reality is it totally exists. And if you're not introduced to it, and if you're not talked to about it in the correct ways, you will certainly develop problems with it in the future. And so that's where it gets really interesting to me, is that we're basically acknowledging, when we allow Disney to do that, we're basically acknowledging that our society has broken down the structures with which we deal with the world in healthy ways. And we're saying, well, when I go to do my escapism, I don't want to deal with anything that could take me down a wrong path at all. Even though I don't think Roger Rabbit is insinuating that it's really great. Even she says, I was just drawn this way. It's like, right. So I think that there's an interesting conversation to be had, but rather than have the conversation, we have advocacy that just removes the conversation from the circle that we should be having it in. It's right. Just so weird.
And that's what blows my mind, Jay, because you have this thing where it's like, when you have a child, you have those tough conversations with your child. That they get bullied at school. You sit down with your kid and you talk to him about it. Your kid grows up and he has a crush on a girl at school or something. You talk to him about the birds and the bees, right? I mean, that's part of growing up. And they just want to sanitize it all and pretend none of it exists. Let's just all live in fantasy land. It blows my mind. Go ahead, Josh. I'm so sorry, brother.
Here's the flip side of that for the men, because 4 dudes talking about a woman's body is probably not the greatest thing to do an hour into a podcast. But when I watched Aladdin, the lesson that I could take away from that is, if I lie to a woman well enough, I'll get her, right? Like I could date her. If I can lie to her and then maybe apologize about it later, that's all gravy, right? But maybe it's lived experience on my part. Maybe it's not. Maybe I just had conversations with my parents. But like, I don't believe in my heart that the answer to dating somebody long-term is to lie to them. Because maybe that's, I have lived experience. I have talked about it. Like, there are things that are on the male side just as much as on the female side. There are bodies when we were all growing up, right? Like, we saw dudes, Sylvester Stallone's jacked. Like, am I going to look like that? Probably not.
Not without a lot of steroids.
Right. That's a conversation to have, like, with people. Does it make me kind of, like, when I look at things that like Abercrombie models and like I see girls going after that when I'm like 14, does that like make me a bit sad? Yeah, of course. But like I have that conversation with my parents or with my peers or with a therapist or whatever, you know, when I'm years down the line. This is a real conversation I've had. Like that is something that you just have to come to terms with and deal with. And it goes back to life is kind of brutal sometimes. And to not be shown things is to shelter you only for a limited amount of time until you have too many problems, because it's shell shock on the other side.
Right.
I do think that the question in my mind is because as a writer, I always this is a central issue in regards to what do you write about and what do you put in your stories, right? And the thing that the line that I always try to draw, which is a very difficult line to draw, and I think Aladdin is actually a really good example, is what does negative behavior tend to result in, right? So like and I think that there's lots of different answers to that, because cheaters can prosper. It's like a total lie that you learn when you're a kid, like cheaters will never prosper. Sorry, like they do. Look at Bill Gates, right? Like the guy's doing pretty well. Although even if you look at the life of Bill Gates, what has now happened to him? Well, now he's divorced because his wife was like, yeah, because you're really involved with Epstein, which by the way has gone nowhere. Who would know we would talk about Epstein on the Roger Rabbit podcast? but the point I'm going to make is this. I think the material has to be authentic, and that's where it needs to land. So when Aladdin lies to Jasmine, there is the moment in Aladdin where that all falls apart for him. And she goes, wait a minute, what? Like, what's going on here? And by the way, she was lying to him too, because when they met each other, she acted like she wasn't a princess. So the question is that do these things, where does truth go? If you lie to somebody and all you do in a relationship is lie, that relationship is going to be insanely toxic and will not end up in a good place, right?
Right.
So now, could you keep lying with different women and get to the place where like you're just a lying person? Yes, but the consequences of that is you're probably lonely and you probably keep going into a place that's darker and darker and darker. And as long as the stories have the natural consequences of what happens, even if it has to showcase it in like a really devastating way, like let's just say Back to the Future Part 2, right? Like, yeah, if you cheat the system and you get to be Biff and you get to be, but look how miserable Biff is, even in that circumstance. He doesn't get any better when he gains power. And I think that's the thing that makes it, to me, it makes it whether or not it holds some level of truth or not truth. And so by nerfing certain things, now on the flip side of that, you will always have people who glorify the thing that shouldn't be glorified. And that's where it gets really bad, right? Because you would have to say that even the movie treats Jessica Rabbit as a person who is struggling with objectification, and you could argue that we don't see as much of the hurt that is caused to both her and Roger by her being objectified, because she's literally objectified by like every dude in the room of the club, right? Including Eddie Valiant. And so I think that there's an argument to be made of like, okay, where does this go too far? What does respect look like? What does disrespect look like? Why do those things occur in life? And that's the thing that I think we lack in a lot of the entertainment is an unwillingness to, they go, I'd rather not address the topic than address it and address it in a way that it may offend people. But here's newsflash. If you're going to address any topic of consequence, it's going to offend people. So it's just, I think it's a.
Well, and I want to say, Jay, you kind of blew my mind a little bit, which you mentioned something that I knew, but I never really thought about, right? With Aladdin, the whole storyline is him lying to her. Prince Ali, the whole thing, the lie, the big lie, right? But you're right. She was lying to him too. She was a princess. You just blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. She's in the marketplace pretending like she's like some, peasant, and she wasn't. She was a princess. So interesting.
Well, this is really interesting too, I think, because like what Walt did was he took stories that had been told for millennia almost,
Right.
some of these stories, right? There were fairy tales built on morality tales based on whatever came before it. And he did tweak them. They're not authentic. The Little Mermaid is a very different story than it is in what we see. But when you take a story that has had lots of iteration on top of it, you can tackle a more critical topic and do so from a place where more people will agree with it. This is where I think that Roger Rabbit, for me, starts to become more adult, is because it doesn't want to tell you what's good or bad. It just presents the material.
Exactly.
And I think we know that the Doom is the ultimate bad guy, and that's fine. But like the other things about like how should you actually view Jessica Rabbit? It just says this is a conundrum. It's clearly not good, but people do it. So there it is, right? Alcohol, clearly not good, but people do it. And I think that's where it's like it feels a little less Disney and feels a lot more Touchstone, right? Because it feels like it's just putting the stuff out there without giving you the morality tale about whether or not you should engage in it.
Well said.
And I think that is where I think that it's a little bit more on the adult side than it is on the kid side, right? There's you have to know how to be able to parse what's uncomfortable, because you're supposed to feel uncomfortable that everyone's objectifying Jessica Rabbit. It's also played for a joke because she's a cartoon, but you're supposed to be uncomfortable with it, right? So if you're a kid and you don't know how to be uncomfortable with that or not uncomfortable with that, you may come to the wrong conclusions. And so there is an age limit where it's like, how much morality can this kid like take?
Right.
But you also have to remember, Jay, she's not bad. She's just drawn that way.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting too, right? Because I feel Disney in general feels uncomfortable with this character because they obviously they covered her up in the attraction recently, you know. But then, in a weird kind of move, like when you buy the movie on like a Blu-ray, it's not a Touchstone movie anymore.
Oh, interesting.
They changed it. It's Walt Disney Pictures. They don't use the Touchstone moniker anymore. So it's like, okay, that's weird. So you're not comfortable with her in the presentation in the ride, but you're willing to slap Walt Disney's name on the DVD. That's weird. You know, it's this weird kind of like, you know, I don't know. I find that interesting. Now that could be, I don't know. Touchstone hasn't really, you know, it's not exactly hot right now. There's not a lot being produced right now from Touchstone. So it's possible that maybe they, you know, kind of, I don't know if they shuttered it or like put it on hiatus.
Yeah, I believe it's dead.
Okay, so that might be the reason why.
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting though that they did put the Walt Disney name on it. Michael Eisner would not do that.
Yeah.
Well,
and he's sending a signal, which is what I think was interesting with this Hulu Disney Plus stuff, because Michael Eisner was sending a signal to people saying this is a Touchstone film, and when I put Touchstone on it, it probably means don't show it to George. Right? Like,
exactly.
But I think that the interesting part about that is that like that was a very countercultural decision to make a cartoon that was like not for kids that would have seen Bambi. You know what I mean? Like it's just a very interesting. There's lots of interesting things about the way society was moving in the 80s that are really, really, really fascinating. I do think I would love to hear more thoughts about this in the comments down below too. Like this is it's a topic that I think that everyone can relate to because everybody's coming at it from a different experience. So love to hear your experience in the comments down below. I'm going to move us on to the last question that I have. And this is where we get to the only negative things I'm going to say about Roger Rabbit, because I really like Roger Rabbit too. And I love, by the way, the fact that it takes place, I think it's in the 1940s, isn't it?
40s.
Is it 40s? Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's the 40s. I've been on this super deep dive, which is completely irrelevant to this, well, somewhat related to this conversation, because I've done this really deep dive into the Black Dahlia murders, which was 1947, post-World War II murder. And there's a lot of information that's come out about that, about who probably did that murder. And it's this crazy story. Very much a Chinatown story, Josh. But it fits into this movie fits into that genre, right? Like it fits into that, like things are like things are seedier than you would imagine, and like it's really interesting to put cartoons like you'd think Toontown is this magical place, and it's like where I go in Disneyland where everything is nerfed, except that Toontown is actually being manipulated by reality world to be their entertainment value, right? I mean, it's this really, really fascinating concept that I really enjoy. So I love all those aspects of it. But here's my question for you guys. What makes the film work? Is it the gimmick of the film? Is it the storytelling? Is it the characters? Is it all of the above? Where does this film work and where does this film not work, Josh?
Well, I want to tell you that if you think it doesn't work, you're wrong. It is.
Well said.
I think it's all of the above, right? This film went over budget because the technical ideas behind it are just insane. We brought up earlier the sight lines, right? Like Bob Hoskins knowing exactly where to look is crazy. It is such a technical marvel, as well as what we've talked about before. It's such an insane marvel that we're getting Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse on the screen at the same time, like mind-blowing. Yeah. But I think what a lot of people underestimate about this film is the time period it takes place, how it fits, how it makes sense, and also the, like, not just the world building, how three-dimensional all of the characters are. Take a character like Dolores, for example, who is a throwaway character in any other film, or at least especially in modern film, right? She is the person that works at the bar. Mm-hmm. But she, in this film, not only works at the bar, you get the sense from everybody else that works at it that she's been there. She's a long-tenured, bartender there at this place. It's 1942, so this bar is coming out of the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. So it's also coming out of Prohibition times as well, and that so like it's a place that maybe used to be a speakeasy. They have that secret back room for that exact purpose. She also dated Eddie Valiant. They went to Catalina Island before, so they had a real romantic long-term type of, or at least enough investment to like go on a vacation together as a couple. Right. He's a drunk. So maybe they met at the bar she worked at. They don't really say that, but it's implied. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a thing that assumes the audience is smart enough to be like, oh, I can put the pieces here together, and even if it's not the right story, it's kind of the story that works in my head. And every character is like that. You get R.K. Maroon, you understand this is a studio executive, this is what he's been doing, this is what he's dealing with, why he's hiring Eddie, etc. Like all of these characters that are you don't really think about, but they work because they're so three-dimensional in this world. And I think that really is one of the key factors to making a movie like this work. And on top of all the technical stuff, on top of the fun, goofy, wacky, slapstick, violent comedy, I think at the heart of this film is here's a group of people who live in a city that just freaking want the city to not be corrupt. And at the same time, you have Roger Rabbit, who's a fun character, who's being framed for murder, and you want to see him as the audience member, not be framed for murder at the end of the film. So you get both, I think. You get this story of people trying their best coming out of the Great Depression, finally making it, coming over the government, coming over the corruption of the city. But then you also get the hero's journey that works. So it works on multiple levels. And I think that's great for Robert Zemeckis, who I would say is one of the greatest world building people. I think that Back to the Future does that. I would say the same thing. I don't know about recent Robert Zemeckis, but 80s prime Robert Zemeckis really made that work.
No, I love what they did with Roger Rabbit in terms of like taking the Toon concept, that Toon world, and kind of grounding it. Like you said, Josh, Roger Rabbit's being framed for murder. Like this is a cartoon we're talking about. You know what I'm saying? It's just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But yet they set I think also a smart move was they set the movie time period wise far enough back in the 40s where even when it came out in '88, it was far enough removed where it's so far in the past, it kind of creates a timelessness. You know what I'm saying? Where if this movie was set in like 1988 and you had a I don't know, like an 80s like, you know, soundtrack and what have you, it would have felt very dated. But they said this, you know, in the kind of like the golden era of Hollywood or what have you, a very grounded kind of storyline where it's like, you know, it's not sanitized, you know, we're talking about cartoons, but in a very adult way. This guy's being framed for murder. His girlfriend or whatever is like this total sex pot chick, right? Like everything is so like grounded and real, and it feels like, hey, look, if there was, this is the thing I love about Roger Rabbit. It feels like if we had tunes living in our world right now, this is the problem we would have. Like this is the issue that we would have in our. It's kind of like what I like. That's kind of like what I like about The Boys, how they deal with superheroes. Where it feels very grounded, like, oh man, this feels like this could be an issue in our society if we had superheroes in the mix, right? And that's kind of what Roger Rabbit feels like. Like if we had tunes in the mix, this is the kind of stuff that would go down. And that's why I think it works so well. It doesn't talk down to the audience. It creates a real kind of like organic kind of like situation. And I love it. And look, I'm telling you, I am not a meta guy. I don't understand Shrek. I don't like that kind of stuff at all. I don't like the meta thing at all. I really, really don't. Roger Rabbit's like the unicorn that really works. And it's meta, but yet at the same time, it's timeless. It's just brilliant. And of course, it's because also you had, like you said, Zemeckis. You had, I think Spielberg was involved in this as well.
Producing.
Yeah, I mean, you had the greats working on this thing. You know what I'm saying? So it's like no shock necessarily that it turned out good. But I don't know, man. I love this movie. I think it really is. I think it really is kind of like this. I mean, I hate to say it, but like the cinematic sort of like, you know, like masterpiece. It really does just kind of nail it, man. I don't know.
Roger Rabbit honestly was even though I was at 4 or 5 at the time of when first watching it, but it kind of set the gameplay in my own head without even knowing it at the time, because I actually owe Roger Rabbit to a lot of me getting into writing and understanding storyline and character, because that film encompasses a little bit of everything. It wasn't just enough to say, okay, this is something that I can get into because there's animated cartoon characters in it, but it also plays to a great storyline that involves live action actors. That there was a lot of dialogue in there that wasn't just with the cartoon characters, but with the live action actors themselves, but then also crossing in between, literally having a conversation with themselves. But when you watch it on screen, they're literally talking to a cartoon character, which that I felt was so brilliant. So I think that kind of stuck in my head as time went on. So as I became more interested in filmmaking and screenwriting and playwrights and what have you, I kind of take myself back to Roger Rabbit, because that was, I feel like, the first movie that really kind of set the stage for me to continue on with that notion. And I also have to say, and this is a fact that no one has known up until right now, it's going to be on Story Geeks for the first time.
Exclusives.
So obviously, for everyone who has seen any show of Orange Grove 55, I have a tagline slogan of balls to the wall. Now, obviously, that is a real life term that a lot of people say, you know, you just kind of, you go for it, you know, you go all in. My interpretation of that actually was created because of me watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Again, way back when I was young, it kind of stuck in my head. At the very end where Eddie Valiant was trying to get the weasels to laugh. So he's singing his little song and everything. So when he says the word walls, and then Roger Rabbit interrupts him and says nose, and then the head weasel goes nose, that don't rhyme with walls. And then Eddie goes, no, but this does, and he kicks him in the crotch.
Right.
So obviously he's not saying that, but it's in that notion where, again, you hold that conversation. So because Eddie Valiant said walls and then kicks him in the know what. So I just kind of put the two and two together. It's like, you know what? Balls to the wall. You know, that's
there you go.
So my slogan goes all the way back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Well, and the beautiful thing too, and this is what I love about like that era of like Disney, is that it really did a beautiful job of like straddling the past and the future in a beautiful way, like flawless. Like they did it with the Renaissance era, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, where these movies felt very much of like, okay, they can sit on the shelf with like the Walt movies, but they felt fresh enough where it was like forward. You know what I'm saying? Roger Rabbit was the same thing. It was like, okay, this movie could like sit on the shelf with a Mary Poppins or a Peach Dragon, this kind of hybrid animation, live action thing, but it was very much its own thing and very forward still. You know, I love that about this movie. I absolutely love that about it.
From a technical standpoint, right, and an animation standpoint, anybody that worked on that film had to learn the styles of every single it wasn't like they went to Fleischer Studios and said, hey, teach us how to draw, or like, can you give us some footage to pull Betty Boop from or whatever. They didn't go wherever. It's like each person working had to learn that style of animation and that style of character in order to put it in the film. So that, I mean, we've seen that too, like the Once Upon a Studio recently, where they're combining all these different styles of animation, and there's something to that speaks to how good the animation department was involved in this. But then on the technical side, I'm like hiding all of the technical stuff. Like when you're talking about, oh, you've got to like take Roger and hold him by the the neck or whatever, and he's got to move this way, and there's like a weight to these characters. And you don't see all of the trickery involved in it to make that happen. It speaks to the departments that are all involved in making that film. Again, it went way over budget because you look at it and you go, yeah, that makes sense. But like, man, what a technical masterpiece. And the fact that the majority of our conversation has not been about that is the reason why it's a technical masterpiece, right?
Right.
You don't see it, and you're not supposed to see it. That's the greatness of filmmaking.
100%. Well said, Josh. Well said. And that even the beauty, we talk a lot about theme parks on this channel a lot, and like that's kind of like the technology you don't see is what makes it kind of magical, right? Like when you go through Pirates of the Caribbean and there's all these animatronics, but you don't see what's really making them tick, or you watch World of Color and you don't really see the technology, you're seeing just the beautiful imagery. That's when the technology kind of blends in and you don't really notice it, that's when the magic happens. And it happens here with Roger Rabbit. You don't see the technology, but you see the result of that technology. And that's what creates that magic. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
And that has been traditionally a Disney staple, because even when Disney has pushed the industry forward, they have only done so in order to tell the story. Now, in recent years, I do think that like James Cameron, George Lucas have maybe pushed that envelope a little further than Disney has, to be honest. But that was Walt was the embodiment of, well, I want to tell a story and I can't unless I do this thing. So I got to do this thing. I got to figure out how to do this thing, right?
Right.
But they never made it about, look what we did. They made it about, we just immersed you in the thing and you didn't even know. And Pixar was like that too. Pixar was really good at that too.
Yeah, well, like Snow White, and all the like the multi-plane camera and all this stuff. I mean, it was like the technology was there. It was impressive, but the audience didn't know that. It was just this like, oh my God, like, what am I looking at here? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It's incredible.
If you spend any amount of the runtime thinking about how it's made, the story isn't good enough.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly. And so here's my one. I'm going to say one negative thing about Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I apologize to everyone in advance. You can tell me I'm a jerk in the comments. I do think that the film has one flaw that bugs me, and you guys may disagree with me completely.
Okay.
I don't think that Roger Rabbit as a character is likable enough. I think he's too annoying.
Oh God.
He drives me absolutely up the wall. So when I watch him, sometimes I don't even like I don't find myself
what you're saying really before you answer, not to interrupt you, like if you were to take Roger Rabbit and just kind of just put him as a standalone without any of these characters,
you wouldn't
that are
watch
kind of like helping, it would be just too much.
It would not be like so. The whole cartoon that happens, the opening cartoon sequence.
Right.
I'm just sitting there going like, all right,
Get me
like,
out of there.
it feels like you're making fun of cartoons, and that's kind of funny. And there's moments where it is funny, but then when he steps out of that environment, and then he's like always just kind of screwing up and like not doing the right thing and acting really annoying, and then you're trying to hide him, and he's like now there are moments where it's played really well that he is. I wish that he was more. That he was stupid, but in a likable stupid. In my opinion, he's an annoying, like kind of unlikable stupid.
You want him to be Olaf.
Correct.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Jay.
Yeah.
So he's stupid but unlikable.
Yeah.
Would you say he's kind of like on par with Goofy, or is he kind of worse than Goofy?
Oh, I think he's worse than Goofy for sure. Goofy is a lovable idiot.
Okay.
Because basically it's not much. Goofy to me is not all that different than Olaf. The only difference is Goofy is more active than Olaf. So Goofy would actually be the better replacement for Roger Rabbit. Like if you were to say like, let's just put a lead character that we know in place, I would be like,
right.
Goofy's cool, right? But unfortunately, for whatever reason, for me personally, I find his character to be incredibly frustrating.
Here's where I will both meet you and fight you on this.
Oh, here we go.
Perfect.
So the movie is named Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yeah.
But the movie is not about Roger Rabbit.
Correct.
The movie is about Eddie Valiant.
That's right.
And you're seeing the world through Eddie Valiant's eyes. What does he think of Roger Rabbit? He thinks he's annoying and stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the reason why Roger is the way he is because if you made him too charming, Eddie would be like, "Oh, of course and as from the audience standpoint, you would be like, why wouldn't you want to help this cute little rabbit character? He's so charming."
Yeah, right,
like,
that's true.
From the audience standpoint, you want to. Eddie Valiant is not a good guy, right? At the beginning of the film, he is a very flawed, kind of crappy guy.
Correct.
But the way to side with Eddie is to make Roger kind of annoying, so that you go like, oh, well, he's gonna be like Eddie's a good guy for taking on this client because oh god, I wouldn't do it. He's better than me. That's a good point. So in that way, I agree with you.
Yeah,
but it's also the reason that it works for me.
Yeah, and I think that what it would take to work for me, I think that all of what you said is completely accurate. The one thing I would say is I think he could be more like Goofy to the point where, like for example, you ride. Let's use the parks as an example. You ride Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, right? Goofy's a complete moron. He doesn't even know that you're gone by the time you roll back in, and yet at no time are you like, I cannot stand Goofy, right? Like he's oblivious. He doesn't know what he's doing. If you watch the cartoon that plays out beforehand, there's even more damage that he's causing. But you kind of go, yeah, but he's a really well-intentioned guy, right?
Right.
But that's okay. But okay. So when you watch the film and if Goofy was Who Framed Goofy.
Yeah.
What a stupid name. Like, if you're watching the movie Who Framed Goofy, and you were watching it and you saw him say like, oh, I'm dating Jessica Rabbit. And then you see Jessica Rabbit. Yeah. You go like, that's weird. But you know what? Good dude overall. Like, fine. He's the funny boyfriend that's like a little bit ugly, but you're like, he's funny, it's fine.
Yeah.
But when he sees Jessica Rabbit and then he thinks Roger Rabbit, he goes, what?
Yeah.
This guy is such a stupid, idiot, annoying jerk. Right. Like it doesn't make sense to anybody. So it's the juxtaposition for him for that. And again,
well, and I think what you're saying is accurate. I think that what you're saying is accurate, and that is, this is not a movie for kids where the main character has to be likable. To be honest with you, it's just not.
But he's likable enough. He's likable enough to, as a kid, you would watch it and be like, Roger's funny at least.
I don't know if I agree with that. See, I don't find him funny. I find him too annoying to be funny.
But you're also not 5-year-old George.
George. Well, yeah, it's funny because I agree with Josh, and I kind of see. I can kind of put myself in Jay's position too. Like,
so Jay, do you see Roger Rabbit of how OG sees the Minions?
Right, I was just gonna say that because I see the Minions as annoying and like in my ear. Like, is that how you see Roger?
There's one difference between like why I'm not as annoyed by the Minions and I am more annoyed at Roger Rabbit is because the Minions to me, now granted, I have not seen any of the films where they're supposed to be lead characters, but they're not supposed to be a well-rounded character. So I go, okay, fine. They're stupid and they do dumb things and it's fine because they're not, to Josh's point earlier, all of these characters are robust 3D character, even the 2D characters are 3-dimensional characters. Whereas with the Minions, nobody's even assuming that they're going to be 3-dimensional. That is a 2-dimensional character outright, right? So so it just feels to me like Roger leans too far into being 2D, and in the way that they make him 3D. But when I say that, to really differentiate what I'm saying, they want you to like Roger in ways that I still don't find him particularly likable. So they want you to feel sympathy for him, and I feel more like Eddie Valiant feels about it, right? I feel more like, and so
which is how you're supposed to feel.
Which is how you're supposed to feel. Acknowledged. I acknowledge that. But like, if you said to me, would you like to see another Roger Rabbit cartoon, and Eddie's not going to be in it? No, I have no desire to see that. Right.
Then don't watch Tummy Trouble. Don't watch Roller Coaster Rabbit because that's nothing but Roger Rabbit. You would
have you seen those? Have you seen those shorts? Yeah.
I have.
I'm sure I've seen some of them. I just don't remember them.
I think there was 3 of them. There was Roller Coaster Rabbit, Tummy Trouble, and something Trail, Mixed Trail, or something or other.
Yeah. But it's why those cartoons. Because Michael Eisner was like, Roger Rabbit's my Mickey Mouse, right? So I'm gonna have this legacy character, and then after 3 cartoons, people were like, I think we're good on this. We don't need any more of this. But it's because he is in his own movie the sidekick character. He's not supposed to be the main character. You're not supposed to want to watch a full hour of cartoons of Roger Rabbit.
Well, the interesting thing too about Roger Rabbit too is like the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit is about this kind of coming together of like the Disney and the Warner Brothers IP together, and Warner and Roger kind of encapsulates all that in one character. Like he can easily fit in that Looney Tunes world and easily fit in that Disney world.
Yes,
right. He's kind of both. It's interesting.
Well, in some ways, he's the embodiment of how tunes are interacting with the world, and we're supposed to look at how tunes interact with the world through him, right? So in other words, Doom is like, I think this is crazy, I'm going to do whatever I want to, but Roger is like, I want to please humans. I didn't get the stars on my head, let me hit myself in the head again, right? Like so let me just say that's my only complaint. Now let me rise it back up to what I like about it.
Because you're wrong.
Was that?
Because you're wrong.
Well, to your point, the movie doesn't work or not work predicated on whether or not you like Roger Rabbit, and that's why I think that it's still a marvel. It's still a masterpiece. I think you're supposed to love Eddie Valiant. I think ironically, you're actually supposed to love Doom because he's one of the most. Christopher Lloyd plays that character in the most satisfyingly sinister ways that you can play a bad guy, right? And so because he's almost a cartoon from the moment you actually meet him, you go like, this is actually a cartoon. Like it's not a real guy. This has got to be a cartoon the way he's acting. And even the way he goes in there and he says like, no tune can resist a shave and a haircut. He just goes around and all of that I think is just done so well. Eddie's relationship with Dolores is done so well. Eddie's the vitriol that the actual police department has for Eddie and the way that they kind of treat him works because then you kind of like Eddie even more despite all of his flaws. And so I think that all of those things do work. It's just that my one complaint is that I just can't stand Roger. Other than that, I think it's a phenomenal film. So we're all in agreement. Phenomenal film. Anything else you guys wanted to cover before we close it out here?
No, nothing really on my end.
No.
I mean, I think we probably took Roger Rabbit down as deep of a road as anyone has ever taken Roger Rabbit.
Or dare
The
I
rabbit
say
hole.
a rabbit hole? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, actually, I don't want to say rabbit hole because that might sound a little dirty. But just okay, never mind.
It's a Bad Thoughts podcast episode.
Exactly.
Shout out to those guys. I've been on their show recently. It was a really fun experience.
Well,
Yeah,
actually, I do have one question. It has
Sure.
to do with Roger Rabbit to you, Jay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned it when we talked about your experience at Disneyland. Did you go on Roger Rabbit Cartoon Spin?
Yeah, because my nephew thought it was the best ride in the park.
He's correct.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, he's not exactly wrong. I mean, good taste. That's
There
a
are some
great dirt ride.
really great scenes in that ride. The scene where you are falling through the skyscrapers is a phenomenal scene, and the effect where they look like they're going to shoot you with the dip because the guy's nozzle is coming back around as you start to go over.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I mean, these are really great moments that feel like they came from the cartoon. My nephew kept asking me, how come we. He didn't ask me in these words that I'm going to paraphrase, but he's like, how come we're laughing at the rabbit getting electrocuted? Like, why is that supposed to be funny? Which I think was interesting. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. But
that goes back to our conversation about sheltering.
Exactly.
I just watched Home Alone the other night, and I was just like, as a kid, I loved the last act of this film.
Yeah.
But like this, and it gets a PG rating. This 100% will get a PG-13 rating now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, I think that there's this component too, right? Where like most of us, when we watch things that are questionable, I'll use the word questionable, right? Because for some people they may be offended, other people they're not offended. When we watch something that's questionable, most of us go, I realize that Home Alone is pretending that all the characters, particularly the Wet Bandits, are all cartoons.
Right.
And we're going to unravel some of those characters and show you that they're actually not cartoons. They're actually real individuals with real problems, like the neighbor with the shovel, right? He's originally played as a cartoon, like, oh, he's a terrifying person with a shovel and he's putting people in buckets and dumping salt over him and stuff. But in reality, he's a guy who wishes he could reconnect with family, and he's now no longer a cartoon. But the Wet Bandits are cartoons throughout. And most of us are supposed to watch that and go, hilarious, because that would actually kill someone. But there's always a percentage of the population that does not understand the difference between what cartoons are supposed to be and what humans are supposed to be, and they ruin it for everyone else. And that is the Paul Brothers.
Because in reality of what happened in Home Alone and yet again in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, I'm sorry, CPS would have stepped in how many months ago and take that child away from those parents.
But you know what, George? He's turned out pretty okay. He's engaged to Brenda Song, so the kid turned out okay.
There you go.
That's awesome. All right, let's go around the horn here and tell everybody where they can find us. OG, you are the Grand Admiral of Orange Grove 55. Where can people find you?
You can find me right here on Orange Grove 55. You can find me on Instagram, Orange Grove 55, and on Twitter at Orange Grove 55. And Jay, as always, gracious host, fantastic time on Story Geeks talking about Roger Rabbit. I do also want to bring an amazing collaboration to the channel because we're talking about collaborations between Warner Brothers and Disney. Or OG and Cookie Monster right here, baby. Right here.
Yeah,
so I just want to bring that. But no, in all seriousness, Jay, thank you so much, brother. I always like talking about deep diving into these movies, deep diving into Star Wars shows, the Marvel shows, and all that good stuff. So again, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure to have you on the channel. Josh Taylor, Modern Mouse. Where can people find you? What are you up to? What's your next video going to be on?
Well, it'll probably be out by the time that this goes live, but you can find me at youtube.com/Modern Mouse, or on all the socials, it's at Modern Mouse Josh. The next video is actually a collaboration between myself and a few other people, including Geek Critique, who they talk about fictional timelines. So if you're ever interested in the world building of things, but I did a video with him on his channel looking at the world of Frozen and like the timeline of Arendelle. And then on my channel, I look at Frozen 10 years later, the cultural impact of that film, both in how it was made and also in the 10 years that ever since it's been out, and I have a lot of friends, and I usually tell silly little narrative stories within my videos these days. But I'm excited for the future. 2024 is looking like there's going to be a lot of collaborations and a lot more narrative silly hijinks happening in my videos. So, but if you're interested in learning about Frozen and its cultural impact, that's my latest video over on Modern Mouse.
Definitely go check that out. I got a little special preview of a few minutes of it. It was very funny. So go check that out on Modern Mouse. Mr. George, the Italiano, host of Citrus Corner. Where can people find you and what are you up to?
You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on Instagram under the Disney Italiano. And of course, you'll find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info. And yeah, we're just going to keep plugging away on the channel. We got a lot of fresh juicy content that we're looking at producing.
You almost got squeezed.
I almost did. I had to stop myself there for a second. Yes. Don't worry, brother, I got you. But yeah, we have some other collaborations that we have in the pipeline for the show. Some things we're also talking that it involves the show, but maybe not necessarily a recorded show. So we're kind of talking some things to figure some things out there. So 2024 is going to be very interesting for Orange Grove 55.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. I'm excited to hear about all that stuff. A couple of shout outs before I jump into where I am. I know that George and OG are veterans at being on the Bad Thoughts podcast, but I'm new to it, and I got a chance to talk to those guys both about No Vacancy. So you can listen to my conversation with them about No Vacancy, the short film that I co-wrote and directed. But you can also hear me talking with Tones specifically about Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, which was a fantastic conversation. Yes. Tones, I think, usually keeps those conversations to about a half hour, but I'm so long-winded in everything I ever do. It's like an hour conversation with Tones. Had an absolute blast with him. So thank you, Tones. Shout out to you for letting me chat about that with you. One really cool thing I want to let you guys know about is that as of next Thursday, we're counting down. You're going to celebrate Christmas with your family. You're going to have a phenomenal time. If you don't have a phenomenal time, join us. Just put on an OG55 podcast and you'll have a phenomenal time with us. But if you have a phenomenal time after you're done with the family, after you're done with watching a podcast, whatever you need to do to get through this family time, come Thursday of next week, December 28th, the trailer is dropping for No Vacancy.
Dude.
So next week you get a chance to see that. I've seen a first round edit of it, and I was really thrilled with it. So can't wait to show you guys that trailer. It will be dropping next week. I also have new content coming out on how stories work with Jay Sherer. I'm doing a whole series, and special thanks to Josh Taylor, by the way, because he always gives me feedback on like scripts and thumbnails and everything. But I have a whole series coming out on I directed my first movie, and here's what I learned. So if you want to know what it's like to direct a film and what I learned along the way, definitely follow me over at How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, because I'll have some of that content over there. And then we will probably, whenever No Vacancy actually comes out, probably late January, February, we will do a watch party. I think we're talking about doing a watch party here on OG55. Yes. So definitely check out all of that stuff. And can't wait to show you guys the trailer. And you can catch me always here on OG55, whether I'm hosting the Story Geeks podcast or hanging out with these guys, just talking about theme parks and whatever else there is. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Leave your comments down below, even the spicy comments. I'm sure Tones and Camper will have something spicy to say. Leave them down in the comments down below. And we will catch you on the next Story Geeks podcast, which we don't have planned yet, but George is an idea machine for these things. So I'm sure we'll come out with them.
I actually have one. I already have one for you, George.
See, exactly.
Good to go.
Hey, we got to get Josh on more. Josh, we love having you on, brother. We got to get you on more often, dude. You know,
I love being here. Let's do it.
Yes.
We'll definitely get Josh on some more. And by the way, I want to talk about Rebel Moon. So you guys go watch Rebel Moon, because I want to talk about that a little bit too. That was pitched as a Star Wars film by Zack Snyder to Lucasfilm. Lucasfilm said, go pound sand. Zack Snyder said, fine, I'm going to make it anyways. And it's very interesting from that perspective. So I'd like to talk about that with you guys. Maybe we'll get Bryant Dillon, huge Star Wars guy. Maybe we'll get him on the show to talk about that.
Yeah.
So check out all the new content coming up. Pleasure to have you with us. Have a fantastic Christmas and enjoy. Maybe even turn on Who Framed Roger Rabbit and have fun with that. But on behalf of all of the Orange Grove 55 channel, we'll see you next time. Bye.